Okay, my name is Ian Snyder, and I'm going to jump in here where Dylan Gunsless has stopped with his our public working forest presentation and talk to sort of about the other side of the coin for our group project was private working forest and insights on how they compare also to public working forest that Dylan has looked at. So um, the key reading for this portion of the presentation is a book, originally a paper, which I will upload as a PDF, but the most recent form of it is a full fledged book by Brett Butler, PhD, who I very fortunately had the opportunity to present with at SAF National Convention in Kentucky several years ago in the same um, session together, which was really gratifying and great and just a real cool opportunity. But ever since then, I've been a big fan and followed his work. And this book, America's Family Forest Owners, is just a masterwork, synthesizing decades of data of the National Woodland Owner Survey, which Brett, for over 20 years, has orchestrated out of the Northeast Research Station or the Northern Research Station. And so it's written for the layperson, and it's just goes right to the heart of some of the underlying issues of land parcelization, conservation ownership, values, and reasonings. Of course, the economies of scale, and it certainly is a touchstone for what I consider the emerging small woodland owner sector or family forest sector, which is just again very significant. And the overall portfolio of forested acres in the United States, around 45% of the forested acres in the U.S. are family forests, which is the majority of private forests, which of private forests are the majority landowner type compared to public forest in the country. And of those acres, there's about 300 million that are family forest. Um, then this is a really big thing here. The average parcel size of these family forests are now around 10 acres or less. So with their overall goal listed here as sort of preserving or protecting nature, um, it's just a glaring bit of statistics and data here that show us that again the economies of scale for family forests now are very different compared to public forests in terms of acreage size, parcel by parcel. And it's just a real amazing work that was published by the Society of American Foresters back in 2021. Um, and particularly from an organization that is by most, I think, fairly seen as like kind of a partner with industry. So it's great to see them talking about the elephant in the room, frankly. So this presents a logical argument that text does for conservation on family forest. If the main goals of those landowners are to protect the forest and keep it healthy, keep nature healthy, and have their own sort of personal forest park in a certain way, then the economy of scale dictates quality over quantity as it relates to output, forest products, and how the land is managed. Um, and so you know, again, to produce quality land management and therefore quality forest products, low impact mechanics and methods are essential on private forests. Simply put, small landowners aren't going to let you tear the place up. And that gets into, again, not what's all taken as much as what's left behind, right? What's the legacy is what remains. And so, these forests, if they're managed that way, can be critical, for the overall big picture, sort of landscape scale forestry that relates to climate change, wildlife, and just functioning society that has abundant natural resources. So pictured here is myself driving a approximately 60 horsepower four-wheel drive farm tractor um, loaded and trailing a loaded it's what's called a log forwarder, which is just an example of, again, these logs aren't being pulled out of the woods, they're being carried out, and that really, as you can see, reduces impact and increases productivity. That's just one example of how sort of conservation forestry, the mechanics of it, can be done on a small scale in family forest, one of many. Um, so the organization that I chose as a sort of example, and one that I'm familiar with as a small family forester, horse logger, um, forest land practitioner. I have had direct experience working under and with these folks, the Blue Ridge Conservancy. I've worked, um, forestry projects, timber harvesting projects on lands that they referred me to. They had easement on, and the person Eric Kegel, who I'll talk about more in a minute, um, was directly involved with working with me on that. So these folks do great work. They're friends, and rather than me, um, uh, uh, you know, um, sort of try to tell their story, there's a really great uh, YouTube clip that they've created here, about 4 minutes long, that I think does a much better job.
Looking out across the mountains, there's this wonderful blue coloring the beauty of the high country.
The wildflowers, the rivers,
Clean air, wildlife, a place to go and walk, a place to enjoy.
From music to art, there's nothing else like it.
Look at what we have now. Will you keep it like this? Blue Ridge Conservancy is trying to do that.
Blue Ridge Conservancy is a private nonprofit land trust. We work to conserve land with agricultural, cultural, ecological, recreational, and scenic values.
We essentially work to protect Northwest North Carolina, which is part of the Appalachian mountain chain that stretches from Georgia to Maine. The Appalachian mountain chain is one of the most important places in the world for climate change. It's just really too valuable to lose. With urban development and fragmentation, the region is really kind of at a tipping point.
Many families have been here for hundreds of years. Their roots run deep.
This property is my family's old farm. My grandfather purchased it in 1914. It's dear to my heart. Mother and Daddy always said, don't let it be built up with houses.
This is the only farm that still exists in this community. I'm the last holdout.
This area is changing and changing rapidly. The landowners want to make sure that their family land can remain undeveloped forever.
Our work is not just environmentally focused, but it's also providing public access and recreation.
green spaces, allowing folks to connect with nature and connect with the river.
You'll be able to just walk out of your office door and you can get outside and breathe fresh air.
Middle Fork Greenway Project, Northern Peak State Trail Project.
It's really recreation for everyone.
When we protect land, we build resilient communities.
When you look out over a mountain view, you see just what amazing natural resources are here. They are not protected by accident. It's taken a lot of effort to continue to protect these amazing areas.
We want it there for our future generations. We should all be active participants.
We are making a difference. This area quadrupled in the amount of conservation land for folks to enjoy.
I'm hopeful because of the leadership of the Blue Ridge Conservancy that know exactly what they're doing and how to do it.
The time for land trusts, and particularly Blue Ridge Conservancy, is to act now.
Our momentum is growing. Now more than ever, people are seeing how important it is to conserve land.
We're the tool that's making that happen in today's world. We're protecting lands, but also history and legacy.
Right. Well, just good little bit of inspiration there, and again, just almost every one of those people in that film are good friends of mine. So I just like to share that story because the one that I'm going to kind of dive into next is specifically again for Eric Kegel, who was in that film or that short video. And Eric, I've known since I was an undergrad, and he, in geography many years ago, he was a grad student. We both went through the same, let's say, department, and he has been a good colleague for a long time, and again, a friend. So, but Eric is, a recipient of the North Carolina Wildlife Foundation Governor's Award for Conservation Achievement, which is pretty prestigious. So it just shows that he is very good at his job and that he is an effective conservationist. And his title at the Blue Ridge Conservancy, based on the interview that I did with him, is the Senior Director of Land Protection and Conservation Planning. He's been in the field actually since 2001. Used to work for the New River Conservancy, or the National Committee for the New River, to stop a dam project, which eventually resulted in the New River being designated a National Wild and Scenic River by the Clinton administration, which was pretty amazing stuff. Basically, the farm I'm sitting on right now would be underwater. And so, like I say, just sort of personal stuff here that hits home with the work that he and his colleagues, and that we've all kind of had a hand in working together to create. But he does work in the 7 counties of Northwest North Carolina, and does have a pretty big emphasis on purchasing lands to then turn into public lands. And again, that can be anything from like a county park, like they talked about with the Greenway projects they have going, and trail projects, all the way out to, Department of the Interior, Blue Ridge Parkway, land that they eventually turn over to them. So they also do easements on private timberlands and cattle farms and so forth. But that is certainly something that he says, according to this interview, that they're doing a little bit less of these days and more focused on just outright acquisition. And how they prioritize those goals are through a conservation plan that's in-house that they write. He said they're actually just about to complete the latest revision of it. They do it about every 5 years. I did ask him about the conservation blueprint that we've been looking at in class, and he said he was familiar with it, but they don't really use it. They focus on sort of their own in-house data, or their in-house analysis of all the both in-house and out-of-house data that they use. But they really, have sort of like a local knowledge kind of fallback. They kind of feel like they know the area well, their team, and with all the other input they have access, to end up really trusting their gut on like the areas that they feel like are most important to prioritize when it comes to choosing which projects get funded and take their attention. And their funding is varied. It does come from many, many different sources, but they do have, according to Eric, about 2 or 3 main state level funds that they in North Carolina are fortunate enough to have, as well as some federal money, but mostly some sort of state level money that is connected to federal funds. But they really lean on those funds annually to do a lot of their work. There are, however, also some private donors and funds that they fill in the gaps with, according to him. And it sounds like sometimes those gaps can be pretty big. They do have some private donors within. You saw in that video, there's the founders of the Mass General Store, which is a big regional chain, and old friends of my wife's family. And, they're one of those private donors for sure. They work with many different public land managers as partners, anything from, Fish and Wildlife Service to, again, small community park type nonprofit organizations and anything in between. And so they definitely are well networked, as any land trust should be, and someone like Eric should be, having done it as long as he has, as long as the organization has been around. And again, the thing I took away from him is that ultimately there is a lot of trust involved in conservation. You do all these things, you put all this stuff into a conservation easement, and then, even especially these days, there's these questions about, well, is the government going to keep these lands that they, are holding in trust? Are they going to turn around and sell them? He and I talked about the federal level being very different than the state level, but nonetheless, there is that kind of like shock and awe concern of like, well, is public land truly protected forever or not? And so that's definitely something that he thinks about. But he said that, again, ultimately there's a lot of trust, and really it's, in his mind, trust in the public to stand up for these values if they ever are sort of shaken or, called into question through whoever's responsible for them. So I thought that was, really insightful. So I wanted to kind of move into here some things that are different based on, again, Dylan's portion of the presentation and my portion. Things are different between public and private working forest. And again, working forest, across the board, but, on both sides of the public and private coin. And number one, I think that are different are obviously the economies of scale. As I said before, it's really big, right? When you're talking about tens of thousands of acres compared to, say, 10. And so obviously that means the stakeholders are different. And when the economies of scale and the stakeholders are different, you're going to have a different soup of decision making that goes into how things are executed and what priorities that you choose, for your land management. And therefore, if your priorities are different, well, then you have different methods that are going to be more predisposed to meeting those priorities or addressing those priorities that the stakeholders, have. So obviously on the private side, the economy of scale is enormous. Again, millions of acres, certainly in some parcels as big as, again, tens of thousands of acres, hundreds of thousands of acres in a certain national forest settings. State forests, sometimes you're talking about thousands of acres, but a lot of times maybe a little bit less, but it just depends. But particularly on the federal level, it's not even the same animal. It's really hard to compare, honestly. But on the private side, you may have like, a mother, a father, and some kids, or one person, a widow, or, an estate. So it's all really, really, really different. And again, all that sort of lays the foundations for, all the way out to, say you've got a small family. So those are the stakeholders. Their economy of scale is 20 acres. Their priorities are, sort of natural land protection, and that maybe they would like to make enough money to help with taxes. So therefore, the methods to meet those goals and objectives are going to be more, again, low impact, not high production, just enough to justify the work. And sometimes it'll be, really challenging to do that work, and not have it be a fee for service scenario. Whereas again, on the public side, you're talking about so much timber that sometimes they can't give it away. The stakeholders are all of us, essentially, as citizens of the United States. The priorities are as wide and diverse, and interests are wide as diverse as the citizenry itself. And so the methods are almost paralyzing to figure out how to do this. So again, challenges on both sides, but kind of for different reasons, and certainly related to that economy of scale. But regardless of that, there are some things that are the same. Both public and private working forests require a healthy woodland. It's all out the window if the forest is unhealthy due to invasive species or really poor management or natural disaster or catastrophe, and all of which certainly happen on all forests, on both public and private, all the time. So that has to be the first sort of thing that is fundamental to any forest management. Is the forest, if it's not healthy, then you're kind of stuck and you're not going to ever really get anywhere. And if the forest is healthy, then wildlife have a chance to thrive there. And wildlife is something on both public and private forest working lands that is universal. There's definitely a high priority, according to Brett Butler's research, that folks who own private family forests want to either hunt those lands or they want to see wildlife be in abundance and healthy on those lands, as a sign of a healthy ecosystem, and again connecting to nature. So the legacy and that was mentioned in there by Charlie Brady at the end of that YouTube clip, the legacy of those lands are on the private side to start with are certainly based on sort of that family's legacy, the history there, the folks that chose to manage that land to the state that it is today privately. But the legacy of public forest working lands are not that different, right? There's this sense of pride that's involved with people that certainly work and manage those lands for the public, and there's a certain sense of pride that the public feels when they get to go be in those forest lands, and be inspired by those places. And so that legacy is not that different, really. It's actually pretty similar. It's both personal and collective all at the same time on both public and private lands, and at least in my mind. And then finally, if all those things fall into place, then productivity is possible and necessary, and a goal for both public and private forest lands. And so, it's really pretty typical, however, to have this sort of list and chain of events here, 1 through 4, to be reversed on both public and private. The first thing is, well, how productive are the woods? Can we make any money off of them? Particularly from a working forest perspective, when in reality, it doesn't really work that way. And treating it as this just abundant well that can always be drawn upon for cash crop type resources is short-sighted, and again undermines forest health, which then makes the whole cycle a pretty negative loop to get into. But again, if all these things are in place and all these values that both sides of the coin have are honored, then there's quite an opportunity for both public and private forests to meet these values, address these values. So some final takeaways are, fences don't care. If conservation forestry is being practiced on the public side of the fence and also on the private side of the fence, the forest ecosystem doesn't really recognize the fence. And so it's not that, one has to fight the other, or that there needs to be this definition between public and private as much as there needs to be a definition between good forestry and bad forestry, or conservation forestry and extractive, destructive forestry. So that's something that I think is important to keep in mind, is that there's not a battle between the two if the two are both doing good work in the woods, right? But regardless of that, family forests, and this is sort of maybe my bias or focus coming out, but family forests are the largest portion of private forest, and private forests are the majority of forested acres in the United States. So family forests actually are key, the key, in my opinion, to having a functioning forest landscape in the country. And only when family forests are well managed and functioning can we have kind of a critical mass of public awareness to manage public forest well. Because then it's not an abstraction. It's something that we can relate to personally on our family's land, or the family forest of someone we know, our friend, a cousin, whoever. And therefore we can relate to it. It's something that we own and are involved with. And we can then say, okay, well, this is what I do, or what I've seen done personally. Well, can we now kind of transfer those lessons out to the broader public forest? At least in my, hopeful, idealistic mind, that I think that could happen. But I do think that there's a lot of value with doing things on a small scale first, well, and then transferring them to the larger scale. And I think that's one of the things that I really came in with as a takeaway from this. And then the final thing is, without both public and private working forests, the country's needs from woodlands just aren't going to be met. You can't really take one piece of the puzzle out and expect the rest of the puzzle to function or to the system to work. If you took all public forests and converted them, like that, to other land use, that would of course be catastrophic. But the same goes true for, industrial private forests, which I didn't really talk about. I chose to focus on family forest, but and the same certainly goes true with family forests. So finding opportunities for these different land bases to work together is key. And then again, sustaining each other independently first is important, particularly in private forests, in order to move the whole forest landscape forward in the U.S. Well, thanks very much. Appreciate your attention. Here's my information. And thanks again to Dylan for holding up his end of the deal. And it's nice to be able to work with people across the country and compare notes and learn from each other. So I'll sign off.